In this video tutorial, I'm going to teach you the techniques for making an infinity ring. And this is made out of 2 sterling silver fork tines. And although it is possible to make this ring in silver plate, it is not recommended because filing and buffing need to be done to remove the seam line, and that would damage the plating on silver plate. So this is best suited to work with sterling. So let's discuss forks first. Your best forks are the ones with the longest tines. So the longer the tines, the larger size ring that you're going to be able to make. And you want to choose the ones with the longest tines. You also want to choose ones that have more rounded tines. So for example, this fork here wouldn't be suitable because the tines are flat and short as compared to this fork here where the tines are very long and they're more rounded. Okay, so salad fork would not be suitable. You're going to look for dinner forks, and again, the ones with the longest tines are the ones that are going to be the most suitable here. And this one is sterling silver, and it has very long tines. So this is what we're going to be utilizing for making our ring. So one thing to keep in mind is the tines on outer sides usually vary a little bit from the tines on the inner part. So you'd want to use the tines that match for this piece. Use your outer tines together and use your inner tines together. Don't use an outer tine and an inner tine, and I'll show you why when we get ready to put the piece together for soldering. So I'm going to cut these tines. I'm going to cut them all off, and you can use a mini bandsaw, you can use a Dremel cutoff wheel, you can use the bolt cutters. I'm going to use the jeweler's saw for this. So I'm going to go ahead and get these tines cut off. I'm cutting off right at the base. Let's see if I can do this without getting my hand in the way. There's one, and instead of boring you with sawing off the rest, I'm going to go ahead and get those done, and then we'll come back. Okay, I have my fork tines cut off, and what we need to do now is to file those cut ends so we can line them up real nicely. Let me change that lighting a little bit. So I'm going to use the miter vise. I did demonstrate this in a separate video, so if you need to refer back to any of that information, you can search for that recent video. So what I'm doing is getting that fork tine set in the jaws of the flat portion. There's one that's angled and there's one that's flat. And I'm going to line that up so I have just a tiny bit sticking out, and that's the part that we're going to file flat. The reason I'm using a miter vise is it makes a perfectly flat surface, and that's what you need when you're soldering. So you can see there's just a little bit of a nub there, and I'm going to tighten that down, and I'm going to use an old flat file, and I'm going to file that completely flat. You don't want to use a good file against the steel of the miter vise, or you'll damage the file. So this is an inexpensive flat file that I picked up at Harbor Freight, and it doesn't matter if it gets damaged. I wouldn't want to damage one of my $30 or $40 files. Okay, so when you feel nothing coming up above the surface, you know you've got that nice and smooth and flat. So we'll take that back out. You'll know you have that nice and flat when the coloring on the cut edge is the same all the way across. You see no difference in the coloring. And so, for example, against this one, you can see at the very tip there how the coloring is different than the rest of it. And then we're going to file it to make the coloring the same all the way across, so we know we have a perfectly smooth surface. So I'm going to do the same thing. Insert this into the miter vise. Miter vise is really an invaluable tool in silversmithing for getting those perfectly smooth and even cut edges. Because in soldering, solder does not fill gaps, and you need your seams to be perfectly fit. You can kind of feel when you hit all the surfaces, then the file tends to glide right across. I'm going to have to raise that up a little bit. You can see the coloring is not the same all the way across here. So I it wiggled a little bit in there. Didn't have it down quite tight enough. So I'm going to have to raise that up a tiny bit. And we're going to have to file that again. Okay. Filing really only works in one way, but when I'm doing rough filing like this, I don't mind going back and forth on it. Okay. All right, so I've got both of the tines filed flat on the top. So you're going to have a little bit of a burr on the edges there. That really doesn't matter too much at this point, unless the burr interferes with the flat surface. And in that case, you want to take a good file and just go around and clean off any burr from the fork tines. You don't want to file much on that top surface, or you're going to eliminate the smooth surface that you just created in the miter vise. So what we need to do now is get these pieces all cleaned up. Soldering it's very important in soldering that you do not have any dirt, any tarnish, any grease, finger oil from your fingers, etc. So I'm going to put these in the pickle pot, and I'm going to let them soak just a little bit, a minute or so, get them cleaned up, and then we're going to work on the soldering. Okay, so we're going to get prepped up to do the soldering here. I'm using my rotating solderite board. I love this tool because this way I don't have to move my flame around. All I have to do is rotate my board in order to get the piece in the right space for soldering. Sometimes you need to get the heat to different areas, and rather than trying to reach the heat over to another side, all you need to do is to turn the solderite board to get your piece in better view. So what we need to do is get these pieces set up so the ends are completely flush. You can see that the fork tines have a little bit of a bend to them. I have flattened them out, but we also need to bend them back just a little bit so they lay flatter on the board. So I'm just using some nylon jaw pliers, and all I'm doing is bending this back ever so slightly so it lays flatter. Okay, we'll try that. That looks better. Same thing here. We need to get this to lay flatter. Just going to bend it back ever so slightly. Because it's sterling, it moves a lot easier than brass. So you shouldn't find too much struggle in getting those to bend. All right, let's see how well we line up. And actually that looks pretty good. So what I'm gonna do, let me just back out here a little bit so I don't get my hands in the way. What we're gonna do is, I've got it on the honeycomb board because we need to pin it in place. Let me just turn that one a little bit more. I don't quite like the way that's sitting just yet. Okay. All right, so I've got these lined up. So I'm going to use my T-pins, and I'm going to pin these in place so they don't move when I'm soldering. So you can use T-pins. I've also got U-pins. And sometimes I think the most difficult part of soldering is the setting up of the pieces to make sure everything is lined up and is held in place properly. I sometimes think that's really just the hardest part. So I've got those lined up nicely. Let me just make sure. I'm going to use one of the U-pins here just to make sure that that little guy is not going to move out of the way. And I'm going to use one on the other side as well. The pins are going to create just a bit of a heat sink, not too bad. And what that means, if you're unfamiliar with that term, the heat sink is when you have metal touching the areas in which you're soldering, the heat is drawn into that metal and away from the piece that you're working on. So it keeps you from focusing the heat on your work, and it takes longer for the soldering, for the solder to melt. I'm not finding another U-pin in my little box there. Let me find another U-pin. Alrighty, I got another U-pin. I've set it on top of this tine over here. And also this tine here was dropping down too far, and it wasn't coming level with the other one. So I took another T-pin, I set it underneath the edge. So, you know, learn to be creative in how you get your soldering set up, and that will really help you in your success, because you have to be sure those pieces are touching and everything is flush and ready to go. So I'm going to be using Mighty Flux today. I've got it in a spray bottle here. And I'm also going to be using hard solder. You're really going to want to use hard solder for this. And the reason for that is we are going to bend right where that seam is. And that's going to create a lot of stress in their area. And you will find that it will break if you don't have your soldering done properly. Of all the soldering I've ever done, I find soldering fork tines for making rings to be one of the most difficult ones. And I believe that's just because we are forcing a bend right exactly where that seam is. So it's really, really critical to get your soldering correct in this area. So I've sprayed on some Mighty Flux, and I'm going to apply the heat and let that kind of frost over. I put a little solder chip over here. I'm putting a little bit of flux there. And I'm going to take my solder chip and I'm going to put it on the seam. Run it right across that seam there. And turn up my flame. Now I'm going to heat the entire thing. You want to keep your solder pick handy. You can see my solder pick has a bend to it, because I found that for certain things I like a bend to my solder pick, and for other things I like my solder pick straight. So I have several of them. And give it a little bit more Mighty Flux. It keeps the oxidation from creating a scale on there, and helps the solder flow. So I'm going to heat everything up all the way around. You can see I'm rotating my solderite board so I can get right along to the back side here. Now I'm going to start focusing more towards the seam. And we're going to wait for that to heat up properly and melt. Solder melts according to the heat of the piece itself. It does not melt. The flame isn't what's going to melt it. It's the heat of the piece that you're working on that's going to cause the solder to melt. Therefore, you want to make sure it's heated all the way through. Now, because I have some T-pins and U-pins here, I do have a bit of a heat sink going on, so it does take a little bit longer. You can see the solder has flowed there. I'm going to flip around to the other side to make sure the solder is pulled all the way through, using my pick to make sure everything is level and even. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the piece over. So let me set my torch aside, and I'm going to remove these T-pins. I'm going to flip the piece over, and I'm going to make sure the solder is drawn all the way through. I found when I didn't do that, when I wasn't certain that the solder had gone all the way through, my joins were breaking. So I like to solder on one side and then flip it over. I would be able to do that normally, but because without turning, I would be able to do that normally without turning the heat off, but because I had the T-pins there, I have to stop. All right, so I'm just throwing a little bit more Mighty Flux on there, and I'm going to heat this back up. And just be sure that I'm seeing that the solder has come all the way through. Let me focus in a little bit more here for you. I just want to see some shininess on the seam on this side. When I see that shininess of the solder, then I know I have achieved reaching it all the way through, and I'm just seeing it now. Okay, you don't want to heat so much that you bust the seam that you just made. So I'm going to let that sit momentarily before I quench and pickle it. I don't want to shock it, create what we call thermal shock. By changing the temperature of the metal too quickly, you can break your solder joint. So I'm going to let that cool down just a little bit. I'm going to quench and pickle that, and then we'll come back. So this has been quenched and pickled, and now is when you want to inspect your solder joint. If you don't see solder all the way through your joint, and you can inspect this very carefully. If you cannot see solder has come through all the way around, you're going to want to solder that again, because you need that solder to flow all the way around. So I'm going to give you one little tip here that has helped me a lot. I have done it a couple of ways, and this is the way I find it to be the easiest to ensure I do everything properly and not have my piece break after I spent a whole lot of time doing the cleanup work. So we're going to eliminate the seam here. We're going to make this seamless so you do not see where you soldered that together. And you can see there's no seam line there. I always say the best soldering is the one that you don't see. So in order to ensure that your solder joint is proper, you're going to want to flex and bend it at this point. If it bends without breaking, you're probably pretty good, okay? You're going to want to do the cleanup after you have done the ring. You can do some to start with. You know, if you've got some edges that are really rough and need some special attention, it's obviously going to be easier to do when the piece is flat as opposed to when the piece is bent. But I have done where I have made this absolutely seamless. I mean, you couldn't see a solder line there to save your life. And it's been absolutely perfect. Everything's been buffed and polished, and I've gone to bend it and it snaps. So I find that it's a huge time waster. So I like to go ahead and get it bent and then do my finish work. So what I'm going to do here is, because I do have a couple of edges that would need a little more attention, I'm going to go ahead and use my file here and take off any of those edges. And I'm talking about the edges of the seam. I'm going to take those off and do just some rough filing. I'm not going to do my finish work at this point. Like I said, I've done that, and I find that I spent a ton of time on finish work. I go to bend and boom, it breaks. Okay. Normally I would file, you know, laying this piece down, but in order for you to be able to see what I'm doing, I'm holding it up here. Alrighty. When I feel like I've got really some of the most uneven areas attended to, we're gonna work on the bending part. One of the other things I like to do prior to bending is give a preliminary polish. That way I don't have so much polishing to do afterwards. So I'm using some sandpaper here. Now this fork tine has teeth marks in it. And I always find things like this really interesting, you know, because this was silverware and was used and was loved. So it's got some teeth marks in it. You know, if you want to keep the character of the silverware, you know, by all means, don't file out the teeth marks. If you are looking for a really nice smooth polish, then you're going to want to work those teeth marks out of there. So I'm just going through, giving a preliminary cleanup to what is now a ring shank. No longer fork tines. Now we have a ring shank. So the seam is better on this side here than it is on this side here. So I'm going to use this as my outside, because it's going to be easier to do the cleanup work when it's on the outside of the ring as opposed to when it's on the inside of the ring. So that is how I determined which way I'm going to bend this. I want to get that inside cleaned up pretty darn well, but I don't want to belabor and spend a ton of time on it either. Like I said, if I go to bend it and it breaks, then, you know, I've wasted a lot of time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bend the ends, and we're going to bend them in opposite directions. So I've got the 7 and 9 millimeter bail pliers here, and we're going to go to the side, okay? So this is the side, this is the front and back, okay? The side is the narrow part. We're going to do the curl to the side. We're not going to do it to the front or to the back, because that's how the ring shank is going to be bent, but we're creating the curls at this point. So I'm starting here at the top. Because this is sterling and it's been heated, it's been annealed. So it is definitely doable as far as bending goes. Okay, so I'm just going to go around and I'm going to make that first bend there. Got my nylon pliers here and keep things lined up that way. And when that looks like you've got it all lined up properly, we'll call it good, and we'll move on and do the other end. Same thing. I'm going to turn this. You're going to get more leverage in here than you are out here. So you want to stick towards the inside rather than the outside. I always like to kind of just roll this off here. Okay, roll that off and it smooths that end. Because it's sterling, it has been annealed, it's soft, and so it kind of just smooths and rolls that end right out. Gives a little bit of a shine there. Okay, and then I'm going to grab tighter, and I'm going to turn in. Okay. Use my nylon pliers. And get that straight. And when that's all straight, then we're going to bend the shank itself into its ring form. So just, you know, kind of look at it and play with it till you've got everything smooth and even. And then we're going to go over to the bender press and we're going to bend this shank. All right, we're at the bender press, and if you remember, I said this is going to be my outside, so that's going to be the portion that's going to face down. So one thing that I have found in making these over time is to don't directly bend on the seam to start with. We're going to coax the metal on either side of the seam first, and we're going to work our way towards the seam. I find when I start to bend right there at the seam, I found I broke the shank more frequently. So I've got the largest pin in the shallow channel. Pardon me, I have that in the deep channel. Let me flip that around. And all we're going to do right now is just gently coax the metal. Only want to coax it a little bit. We're not creating any strong bends at this point. We want to be very gentle. It's been annealed, so it's actually quite soft and pliable and very easy to bend. And you know, you could actually bend this right around a ring mandrel by hand, but of course if you have the bender press, it's just going to make it a ton easier. Okay, so I am not going in straight either because I'm creating a bypass ring. I'm rotating that a little bit, okay, because I want these two loops to bypass each other. Let me see if I can put the camera up so you can see. I'm turning it just a little bit where it's at an angle, okay? We're just going to keep coaxing it around as far as we can take it on the large pin. What size rings? People are going to say, well, what size ring can I make? It's entirely dependent on the length of your fork tines and the size of the curls on the ends. It's not going to be a really large ring. Not if you want the curls to overlap each other in the ring, just like the ring I showed in the beginning. Okay, you can see how we're coaxing it and we're getting it closer and closer. Just about maxed out here at this pin. So what I'm going to do is change to go down to the next size pin. Don't jump down too quickly. Go to the next size. Don't jump down to like the mini pin, for example, because you're gonna go too fast and you're going to risk kinks in the metal, and you're also going to risk breaking your seam. Okay, I think I've got it just about where I want it to be. Okay, it's right like that. So they kind of flip up on either end. So I'm going to get my nylon pliers, and we're going to take and we're going to turn those. You can coax them a little bit. You know, if you put the curls right directly under the pin, you can coax them a little bit, but you really want these curls more to be flat across rather than curved like the ring. You can do it the other way. I just find that it looks better when the loops are flatter across. Okay, let me grab my nylon pliers, and I'm gonna turn those. Okay, so all I'm gonna do now is to take and turn. Give it a squeeze. Come over here and do the same thing. Give it a squeeze and just manipulate those curls into place. Okay, look at it from all angles. Till everything is nice and flat across. Okay, just a little tweak there. And actually that looks pretty good right there. All right, so we're going to go back over to the bench, and I'm going to show you the finish work on the ring. Alrighty, so we're going to do the finish work here. Now remember, I told you it had some teeth marks in the tops of those, tips of those tines. Let me see if I can get that to where it will focus so you can see the teeth marks. I want a nice high polish on this, so I'm going to remove those teeth marks. Again, that's not something you're really going to be able to do effectively on silver plate because you're going to remove the plating. We're also going to eliminate the seam line with the finish work that we're going to do. Let me focus that a bit better. I did pretty good on the inside, so we don't have a whole lot to do on the inside. So what I've got here is the rubber bullet. We sell these on our website. It's abrasive, and so we're going to work on removing that seam line. Sterling silver is really a dream to work with, because you can make a glassy finish. You can get out tool marks. You can get out nicks, bumps, scrapes. It's still quite deep there, so I'm going to use my file, and I'm going to remove a little bit more material before I go to the rubber bullet. So the strokes for this, the strokes for the ring are not going to be right straight across. You're going to follow the curve of the ring. Can you see how I rotate the ring as I go? And you can see how we're getting rid of that seam line there. Okay, there's a little bit on that edge. I really just love creating things with solder. I used to just dread soldering. I didn't want to learn because it was so frustrating to me. But there came a time when I just said to myself, darn it, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to solder. And so I immersed myself in YouTube videos of some really great silversmiths. And they all have their own ways of doing things. Does it make one way wrong as opposed to another way being right? Everybody's got their own special ways of doing things. So I learned from all of the different people. And that's what I recommend. when people say, you know, I don't like soldering. It's frustrating. I can't stand it. It never works. You know, and I've heard it all. And I used to say it myself. So immerse yourself in YouTube videos on soldering. We have a few, but there's some great artists out there. Leslie Pale Villarreal, Sonam Harrison, Nancy L.T. Hamilton. Let me think, who else we got? Right off the top of my head, I can't think of a couple more, but I'll link them below. I'll put their names below the video so you can look for their work on YouTube. Now I'm going to go all the way around the inside, including the loops. And removing all the little scratches and the tooth marks. There's so many tools and techniques for finishing silverware, sterling silver, including sterling silverware jewelry. I just use a variety of things, a variety of finishing techniques, a variety of tools. Just trying to show you some really simple, easy things that you can do to kind of maybe to break you out of a rut. You may feel like you're in a rut with your creating and you want to take it to the next level. And really soldering definitely opens up a whole new world. Amazing. You can make connections that you couldn't make previously. I'm going to turn that one in just a little bit. I like the curl on the bottom here, but this one I don't feel like it's turned quite enough. So I'm going to go back in there, give that just another tweak with the plier. And again, this is the 7 and 9 millimeter bail plier. We have those on our website as well. That looks better. I love the fluidity of sterling silver. It just moves so nicely. It looks so beautiful. I much prefer it over gold. Always have. Always preferred silver over gold. Which is a good thing because gold is extremely expensive. Okay, so I have got out teeth marks and I've got out nicks and scratches and all that. And I'm going to check the inside here. Now I have a marking tool, a 925 marking tool. It's a ring tool. And I'm going to mark the inside of my ring with 925 at the very end. If you don't have the ability to mark rings when they're bent, then by all means, before you do the bending, go ahead and make your mark. The problem I have found when I make my mark too early on is the buffing and the cleanup and the sanding and all that done afterwards can remove my mark. So I did get myself a ring marking tool with 925 on it. Or you can get a bent shank marking tool. Okay, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do, I've got it. I'm going to leave that satiny finish in there. I don't know, there's something about having a satiny finish on one part of a piece of jewelry and a high polish on another that I really, really like. So now we're going to go over to the bench buffer and we're going to do the finish polishing. Okay, so I've shown you some really basic finish work. If I were working on a fine piece of jewelry, I would labor a lot more in my finish work than what I'm showing you today. So there are loads of videos on how to finish silver, going through many different grits of sandpaper, going through many different grits of abrasive wheels, etc., to create a high shine and a flawless finish. So I'm just showing you some basic things to try and get you to break in to doing some sterling work, okay, without being just overly confusing and trying to show you a ton of different techniques all in one video. I just want to show you some really basic finishing techniques. So when I polish rings, I like to put them on the steel mandrel. I feel like I have better control than trying to do it just holding it with my hand. So I'm going to use white compound, and that is on, I'm going to do that on the harder wheel here, and that is abrasive. So it's going to remove any swirl marks, any tiny little nicks or problems that are left from the work that I just did. And you can really get a beautiful shine with the white compound. So just touch it on the wheel. You don't need much. Make sure you hang on to the ring. Okay. Let's see if I can get that, show you this a little closer. And we're just going to continue. We're going to polish the whole ring. It's going to get hot, so you may need to take it away from the wheel for a few moments and let it cool off. You would never be able to polish this aggressively with silver plate, not with white compound, because you would remove the plating. So again, this is why I'm teaching this to you in sterling silver rather than in silver plate. Like I said, it's possible to do it in silver plate, but you're not going to be able to get the finish work that you get on sterling. So I'm going to flip the ring over. A little more compound. And I'm also making sure I'm getting all the edges all the way around. You can see the bench buffer gets used a lot here. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take it and I'm going to examine it. And I'm going to bring that in. Bring that in so you can see that closer. I'm going to check my work here and see where I might need some more touch-up. I could use a little more touch-up right there, right on those edges. But you can see how I've gotten the nicks out from the teeth marks, which looks really good. We also have removed the seam, so there's no more seam. I'm just going to give that another little touch up right on those edges, and I'm going to have to hold for that. You always want to approach your wheel below the 3 o'clock mark. If you reach, if you put your piece up above that, it'll rip it out of your hand. You could really get hurt. I've had pieces fly all the way across the room. I've had pieces that I've never found again. Which is pretty frustrating when you've worked on something a long time and you lose it to the little elves that live in the bench buffer. If you are working with white compound and you're polishing away and all you have is nothing but black gunk on your piece, you've got too much compound on your wheel. Don't apply any more compound until you eliminate that problem. So just keep using the wheel, but don't apply any more compound until that stops happening. Okay. And that looks pretty good. All right, we're gonna go over to the rouge side of the wheel. Alrighty, this is the red rouge. This does not have any abrasive product in it. So this is where you're gonna get your next level of shine from. Could do that right on your steel mandrel. I'm just going to hang on to it. I'm going to go on the back side there. Just hang on tight. And make sure you keep your piece low on the wheel. And that looks good right there. So we're going to clean up any of the polishing compound residue. Now, this would be the time, if you're going to tumble, this would be the time to put it into the tumbler. And you could let it tumble for half an hour, hour. I'm going to just go through and I'm going to get all of the gunk cleaned off. And then we're going to do our final inspection on it. You can do your inspection and then 5 on here. Alrighty, get all that black gunk off of there. I still have maintained my satiny finish on the inside, which I like. Okay. All right, completely seamless. Excellent, excellent. And seamless on the inside as well. And we've got a really nice bright shine. I'm gonna mark it and we'll be done. Alrighty, here's my marking pliers. It's loaded up with a 925 stamp in there. And give it a press. And let's see if I can show you where you can probably see right down there at the bottom where it says 925. Alrighty, so that is the infinity ring. If you have any questions, be sure to post them and I'll be happy to answer them. And we'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.